day. That rain will persist across the far southeast through this evening, but it will slowly turn dry and clearer throughout the night. So clear skies will develop for many areas through the first part of the night. We'll likely see a frost across many areas of Scotland, northern England, as well as some northeastern areas of England. And we could see some mist and fog by tomorrow morning. But across the southwest, some wet weather will arrive by the early hours of Friday. That will turn to snow over the high ground of Wales, as well as northern areas of England, potentially into parts of Northern Ireland and northern Scotland as well, if that rain does push further north. And it will be feeling much colder wherever you are on Friday. We'll see some blustery showers as well moving in across many southern areas. We could see some sleety stuff falling over the moors too. So a chillier feeling day and a rather unsettled end to the week.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. So join me, Tom Harwood, for the Rochdale by-election results. From midnight through to 6 a.m, we'll discover the twists and turns of the most unpredictable by-election in a long time.
He should be celebrating. I mean, I slept during it, you know.
And from 6 a.m. Friday, join Michael Portillo on GB News Breakfast for his take on the results. GB News, Britain's election channel.
Very good morning. Right, there's a big report out this morning about Wayne Couzens. It's going to reflect badly on the Metropolitan Police, no doubt.
He was the Metropolitan Police killer who raped and murdered Sarah Everard, which is 3 years ago this weekend. The Metropolitan Police Commission was the job here, if you remember. Also, Prince Harry thinks he's going to appeal against that ruling against him on his protection officers. And we think we might see Prince William out and about today, which will be very encouraging, because we still don't know why he wasn't at that big event at Windsor
That's
Castle.
right. So, yeah, Prince William will be out and about this morning. We will be bringing you that as well, live, and a lot more.
And the row over the play, where 2 nights a week, only black people can watch it, no whites. Absolutely true. Can you believe it? I can't.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, We'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9:30 on Thursday, the 29th of February. Yes, leap year day. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Don't get your hopes up for a proposal, Mr P.
I'm praying that there isn't one.
Now, the latest immigration statistics are about to be released from the Home Office this morning. We're going to have the very latest analysis on the data, including how many illegal crossings have taken place. That's to the end of 2023.
And the inquiry into Wayne Couzens will be released today, unveiling new information on the Metropolitan Police Officer's behaviour before he raped and murdered Sarah Everard.
And Prince Harry will appeal the High Court's decision to downgrade his security status. Is he wasting the police's time, or does he still face serious security threats?
And Rishi Sunak has summoned police bosses to Downing Street to tell them to use their powers to crack down on protesters or risk losing Britain's streets to what he calls mob rule.
And we're also going to be discussing whether this West End play should be allowed to only accept audience members who, as they say, identify as black.
Two nights a week.
For 2 nights a week. They're only going to be doing it for 2 nights. And I think it's just 2 nights in total.
Right.
One in July and one in September as an experiment. Should they be allowed to do that, or is it just pure discrimination?
Imagine the row if they said only a white audience 2 nights during the production. It'd be closed down.
Yeah. And we'll be explaining why they're doing this anyway, and it's about the white gaze, apparently, and black people not being comfortable being looked at by white people. I don't want this division. I want us all to just get along and play nicely. Anyway, let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. A major report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by serving police officer Wayne Couzens is due to be published this morning. The long-awaited review is set to severely criticise Kent Constabulary and the Metropolitan Police after they missed warning signs prior to the murder. The former Scotland Yard officer, who was said to be nicknamed the rapist, was reported to police several times for flashing, but no action was ever taken. He went on to kidnap, rape and murder Sarah Everard in March 2021. Rishi Sunak has warned that the UK is descending into mob rule as he tells police to use their powers to protect MPs from threats. This comes after a £31 million security package was announced to provide politicians with dedicated police to liaise with over their safety. Concerns are growing about MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office says the money will be used to increase private sector security provisions, and all elected representatives will have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with. And a further £54 million will be given to Jewish communities to tackle what Rishi Sunak called the utterly sickening rise in anti-Semitism in recent months. The government funding totalling £72 million will give the Jewish community dedicated security and protection and tackle anti-Semitism. Nearly 200 schools and more than 250 synagogues have been able to hire more security guards. The Prime Minister has said that the rise in racist attacks meant that the whole fabric of our nation is under threat. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Morning, welcome to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, coming up, we'll be talking about the big report that's coming out today into the police killer Wayne Couzens. He murdered Sarah Everard and raped her. Could her death have been prevented? We'll bring you the latest as that report happens.
But first, some breaking news for you now. The immigration statistics are out at the moment, and quarterly statistics relating to those which come to the UK and extend their stay temporarily or permanently. This is about gaining citizenship, applying for asylum and being detained or removed, as well as immigration for work, study and family reasons.
So the Home Office publishes...
Let's go to Ivan Simpson.
Yeah, exactly. Immigration lawyer Ivan Simpson. Ivan, morning.
Good morning, Andrew. Good morning, Bev.
Have you had a chance to look at them? What are they telling us?
Yeah, I have, and I've been frantically reading them this morning. Interesting read, actually, and I've sort of summarised for your listeners what they say, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, please. We haven't had time to see them yet, Ivan, so this is news to us as well.
You want to know what the magic number of net migration? That hasn't really changed. 1.3, roughly 1.3 million people coming in, and the people leaving is pretty constant every year, about 500,000. So it really it doesn't really show that net migration is coming down. In fact, it's still going up. The majority are work and students. Work visas are up by 54%. But the interesting thing is skilled worker visas are up only 9%, whereas the social care workers have doubled. So it sort of identifies where there's a need. Study visas are up by 8%. To 643,000, and that's because the government have cracked down on dependents, and that's why there hasn't been a bigger increase, I think. The returns is interesting because we had an increase of 54% of people that we're enforcing returns, but that's still only less than 2,000 people in a year. So that's not really a good track record, especially when you think that there's estimates of over 1 million people that are in the UK illegally. So I'd like to know what the government are doing to track them down and removing them from the country. Families is up quite a lot by 79%. So what that shows is British nationals are marrying more overseas and bringing family members to the UK. Most of them will be partners. And that's quite interesting as well. The other interesting point is the sponsor licensing. So there's a huge increase in the number of companies applying for a license to bring foreign workers. In the last 3 months of 2023, there were 10,800 decisions, an increase of some 56% from last year. So what it shows is companies are looking to recruit from abroad. The government needs to invest. We need to recruit local workers, British nationals, settled people. And the government needs to have a dedicated minister dealing with that.
Ivan, a lot of people listening will pick up on the figure you mentioned 2,000 people kicked out, if that's the right expression. It's not many when you consider 30,000 crossing the channel every year. And many of those, I suspect, are illegal, are economic migrants and therefore shouldn't qualify to stay here.
Absolutely, I'm really 100%. Funnily enough, voluntary returns is up by 74%, which was 17,301 people voluntarily leaving the UK. And the bulk of them were Albanians because of the crackdown on Albanians here.
But those would be considered voluntary returns as opposed to having to be sent back because we have the returns agreement with Albania.
Yes, I mean, enforced returns, it's pretty dreadful. And when you consider the amount of money Border Force has, the number of officers it has out there, it begs the question what they're doing.
What do you think they are doing? Because they don't appear to be doing their job.
I think the government's focus really is so much on stopping the boats. Their energy is stopping the boats. We have a huge problem in illegal migration within the UK. There's over 1 million people, unaccounted for individuals, illegally in the UK. And nobody's talking about that, which is quite astonishing. The numbers coming across the channel are quite small. 26 to 40,000 people a year. It's the ones that we don't see, Andrew and Bev, the ones that are unaccounted. And we need to secure our borders. We need to get a handle on it to make sure. And you'll know the Home Office inspector was recently sacked. I'd be interested to see the rest of those reports that the government is sitting on, because I would imagine much of that is to do with the inaction, inefficiency of Border Force.
And they may be concentrating on the small boats, Ivan, but they're not stopping them. They appear to just be acting as a welcoming party.
Well, look, it's difficult because we need Albania returns agreement worked. We need to have similar agreements with other countries. We should have an overarching agreement with the EU itself. so that, people can be returned as they used to be under the Dublin Convention when we were in the EU. So we need an overall agreement.
Did we really send... People always say that, Ivan. How many did we send back when we were under the Dublin Convention? They were pouring in the back of lorries.
You're right. I think you're right, there were, and we couldn't see them. But I think the latest figures I saw was 70,000 a year were sent back under the Dublin Convention. So it did work to some extent, I think. But the problem, we're not sent... I think we've sent the small boats people. I don't think anybody's been sent back, not a single person.
Hopeless.
So
no,
that's not acceptable.
No, it isn't.
All right. Thank you very much, immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson. There. We will get a little bit more detail about these figures. As we say, they literally just they aren't anyway yet.
We'll go through, because we've got to go through the numbers, but but basically no change. It's still, legal migration is running at 750, 800,000 a year. A joke, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a major town. It's a major town. How can we put up with this? No room, no schools, no school spaces, no rooms in hospitals, no houses. It's
a challenge, and what if Labour get in the next election?
It'll be worse.
Then what happens then? I mean, it does feel like we're at a tipping point, doesn't it? It does feel like we're at a time in history where the government, or not just of this country, actually, of every country around the world, has to decide: are we just going to live in a borderless world? Because there are certainly some very powerful globalists leaders on the global stage who would like that, who would like us to just all... There'd be no such thing as a nation state. You just are a resident of this planet. But I don't think the vast majority of people who live a normal life on high streets in the UK feel the same way.
No, and actually, it's bad enough here. Germany and France, it's much worse.
Exactly.
Much worse. Coming up, we're going to get the latest on the upcoming independent report into the police killer and rapist Wayne Couzens. It's all about the new information that the police had about that killer. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good morning, thank you for joining us. It's 9:45, so a major report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer is due to be published this morning.
It's part of the public inquiry which was looking at whether chances to identify the murder of Cousins as a danger to women were overlooked.
That's right. The former Met Police officer was given a whole life term for her murder. GB News' Home and Security editor Mark White reports.
It was a horrific, senseless crime that sparked widespread revulsion and fueled a nationwide debate on women's safety. The abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard was all the more shocking, given the man responsible should have been someone she could trust to keep her safe. The revelation that the killer, Wayne Cousins, was a serving police firearms officer plunged the Metropolitan Police into crisis, with serious questions over whether the force missed signs of earlier offending behaviour. That crisis intensified in the autumn of 2021, with the arrest and then subsequent conviction of another Metropolitan Police officer, David Carrick, a serial rapist who assaulted 12 separate women. Carrick was attached to the same armed unit as Wayne Cousins, responsible for guarding Westminster, Downing Street and other highly sensitive sites. Like Cousins, Carrick had a history of complaints, in his case dating back 20 years, but he still passed multiple vetting checks.
I look back on my time within the Met, and it was over 30 odd years, and there wasn't anything like this going on at all, nothing. So something has clearly changed. Something has gone wrong with the recruitment, the training, the vetting, the supervision of police officers within policing and within the Met. So fundamentally, there's something gone wrong with the Met structure and how officers are looked at.
Do you know where Sarah is? No. Right.
Examining both the Wayne Cousins and David Carrick cases, the Angiolini inquiry has focused on the potential missed opportunities to identify their offending behaviour at a much earlier stage. For Cousins, that included incidents of indecent exposure in Kent in 2015 and again in the months before Sarah Everard's murder. David Carrick joined the Met Police in 2001. He was later investigated over an allegation of domestic abuse in 2002. Despite this and a string of multiple other complaints against him, he was recertified to remain as an armed police officer. Without doubt, the Angiolini report will make very uncomfortable reading for the Metropolitan Police and the service as a whole. Across the UK, forces say they have tightened their vetting procedures and are now reviewing past vetting decisions on all currently serving officers in an attempt to ensure those who've no right to hold such a position of trust are booted out of the service. Mark White, GB News.
Thank you, Mark.
It's going to be, I mean, this is one of the bleakest moments in the history of the Metropolitan Police because there were so many red flags which will be identified in this report about his behaviour to women. He'd been exposing himself to women days before he killed Sarah Everard, and he exploited lockdown rules, if you remember, and plainclothes police officer, and she brutal, terrible, and in fact the Metropolitan Police Commission lost her job over it.
That's right. Well, joining us now is our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Good morning, Mark. So 20 years of complaints against Wayne Cousins. It's just remarkable. We're going to hear of this report. We're going to hear the details of it, I believe, at 10:30 this morning. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Dame Eilish Angiolini will highlight what she has found to be a series of failings by police forces, not just the Metropolitan Police, but Kent Police as well, with regard to Wayne Couzens. He first came to light effectively in 2015 at a time when he was working for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. He had been involved in an incident of indecent exposure while driving a vehicle in Dover in 2015. A couple had reported that to the police. They'd given the police in Kent a registration number for the car and a description of Couzens. They later, Kent Police, identified Wayne Couzens, but then the original complainants had apparently withdrawn that complaint. But despite this not then being proceeded with as a criminal matter, clearly it's intelligence. That information on a potential sex offender should be there and in the system for other people to access when they're vetting an individual further down the line. And then, as Andrew mentioned there, yes, there were other incidents closer to the time when he abducted, raped and murdered Sarah Everard in 2020, November of 2020, about 4 months before Sarah Everard's murder. He again was involved in an indecent exposure incident in rural Kent, flashing at a cyclist. Again, she gave details, a partial registration number, but that case wasn't fully, it seems, investigated. And then just weeks before Sarah Everard's murder, Wayne Couzens again was involved in indecent exposure incidents, 2 incidents, separate incidents in a McDonald's in Swanley in Kent. That time, a description was given, vehicle registration was given, his bank details were given because he clearly bought food and used his bank card to do that. That investigation was underway, but it was very slow paced and it hadn't actually properly got underway when he then went out and used his police warrant card to flag down Sarah Everard and to abduct her before raping and then murdering her.
OK, thank you, Mark. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor. And as we say, this report will be released at about 10:30 this morning. We will let you know what it says and what recommendations there could be for them. Is it about a cultural change? Is it about not being so keen to cover up for a friend, effectively a teammate, a colleague? Because we might find out that's precisely what happened.
But I also wonder, do women in particular feel any more secure on the streets of London? If you recall, when this shocking story came out, the advice was, if you think it is a plainclothes police officer behaving inappropriately, you flag down a bus. Yeah. Remember? Extraordinary advice. That's the best they can come up with.
I don't think we do feel particularly safe. And I kind of think about myself, but then I also, more importantly, I think about my daughters, actually, as young teens. We almost never see a police officer in our area. When my children have been or have seen crimes, particularly my eldest, who's 20 now, when he has seen a crime being committed, I mean, he was cycling home the other night in the small hours of the morning and he said, there was 3 blokes, Mum, breaking into a house in Barnes. And I said, what did you do? And he said, they just looked at me and went, shh. Like that to my son, who was also on a bicycle, he was riding past on his way back from the pub. And I said, did you ring the police? And he went, no, because why would I do that? Yeah. And that generation just don't think to ring 999.
He'd also be worried.
Don't hammer it home into
He'd also be worried if the burglars saw him on his phone. They'd chase him down the street, they'd nick his phone, they'd knock him out and they'd pinch his bike as well.
Exactly. And you just feel that there's a sense of just absolute lawlessness at the moment, whether it's the shoplifting epidemic we're living through right now.
Terrible.
People just going into shops, taking what they want off shelves, and all that the shop manager does is ring the police to get a crime reference number to claim on the insurance. There seems to be no attempt to catch criminals. No. You wonder whether... I know that... listen, the police... I have family members of police officers. What would we do without them? They are remarkable. And I'm sure they are as frustrated as we are about the fact that they seem to spend a lot of time doing paperwork and not enough time catching bad guys, which is what they go into the job to do.
Too much time gazing at computer screens looking for hate crime.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hate crime.
And I get it. And cybercrime is a big problem. We're putting resources into fraud, online crime, digital crime. That's all really serious. But meanwhile, nobody feels they can go out onto the streets to get on the bus and think they're going to go home with their handbag, their phone and their physicality intact. Right.
Yeah.
Still to come.
Yeah. And Prince Harry, he's appealing that verdict yesterday, which said the government was right to say that he can't pick up the phone and say, I want armed protection officers.
Yep, and also Prince William is out and about this morning, and we will be bringing you that live. I wonder how he is. Let's find out. So first, the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Rain will persist across southeastern areas through today, and behind it we'll see sunshine and blustery showers. It's quite blustery across Scotland through this morning, particularly across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Some gale-force winds are expected through the rest of the day, so a very windy and unsettled day to come. Elsewhere, though, across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland into Wales and central England, it will turn a bit brighter as the day goes on, but there's also a risk of some quite heavy downpours as well, and will feel much colder than the past couple of days too. The far southeast, yes, it's milder, but it will be wet and cloudy through much of the day. That rain will persist across the far southeast through this evening, but it will slowly turn dry and clearer throughout the night. So clear skies will develop for many areas through the first part of the night. We'll likely see a frost across many areas of Scotland, northern England, as well as some northeastern areas of England, and we could see some mist and fog by tomorrow morning. But across the southwest, some wet weather will arrive by the early hours of Friday. That will turn to snow over the high ground of Wales, as well as northern areas of England, potentially into parts of Northern Ireland and northern Scotland as well, if that rain does push further north. And it will be feeling much colder wherever you are on Friday. We'll see some blustery showers as well moving in across many southern areas. We could see some sleety stuff falling over the moors too. So a chillier feeling day and a rather unsettled end to the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
It is 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of February. Happy birthday if you are a 29th of February baby. What an unusual day. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, the inquiry into the police officer Wayne Couzens will be released in the next hour, unveiling new information on his behaviour before his heinous rape and murder of Sarah Everard.
Well, Angeli, inquiry report is without a doubt going to make very uncomfortable reading for the Metropolitan Police, Kent Police, the police service as a whole. It will highlight multiple failures to investigate previous offending by Wayne Couzens and also weaknesses in the police vetting procedures.
And as latest figures show, hot off the press, legal migration in the UK is up. We're going to be speaking to the former First Lady of Northern Ireland, Dame Arlene Foster, as tensions escalate in Belfast.
Prince Harry? Can't get enough of him, can we? He's appealing the High Court's decision to downgrade his security state. Is he wasting police time, or does he still face serious security threats?
And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has summoned police bosses to Downing Street to urge them to use their powers to crack down on protesters, intimidating or risk losing Britain's streets to what he's called mob rule. That's quite refreshing, Rishi Sunak using that sort of language. But
tough
words.
Mean
anything?
Well, I think what he's saying is we're in danger of mob rule taking over as opposed to democratic rule because of the way the police are turning a blind eye quite often. Some of these big demonstrations, turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism. Look what they did on the Big Ben.
From the river to the sea was projected on Big Ben.
It's not anti-Semitic, it's genocidal.
Quite.
And the police said, can't do anything about it, Gov, they've not broken a rule. Or law. What?
So
it's anti-Semitism. That's against the law.
So I don't say this very often, but well done, Rishi Sunak. If that is right and you are going to tell the police that they should be using the powers that they already have, great. But they just don't necessarily need more powers.
And of course, this has been the big debate all week. The police have the powers and they don't use them properly, but they seem to use them properly against in other ways.
Right, we will be reading your emails, dbviews@gbnews.com. But first, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, Andrew, thank you. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story. A major report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by former police officer Wayne Couzens is due to be published shortly. 33-year-old Sarah Everard was murdered on her way home in Clapham in South London in March 2021. The long-awaited review is set to severely criticise Kent Constabulary and the Metropolitan Police after they missed warning signs prior to the murder. The former Scotland Yard officer, who was said to be nicknamed the rapist, was reported to police several times for flashing, but no action was ever taken. Rishi Sunak has warned that the UK is descending into mob rule as he tells police to use their powers to protect MPs from threats. This comes after a £31 million security package was announced to provide politicians with dedicated police to liaise with over safety concerns. Concerns are growing about MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office says elected representatives will have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with. Schools Minister Damien Hines told GB News it's important to defend democracy.
It's really important to protect our democracy. That's not just members of Parliament, of course, but it includes members of Parliament. We have a representative democracy, and it's really important that that can go about its business, that individuals can go about their business, and, by the way, their staff members and families without fear. So I do think it's right that there is this focus. The police obviously do fantastic work, and we're all very grateful to them. And yes, I do welcome that focus that the Prime Minister has brought to protecting our democracy, our democratic process, and democratic participation.
The £54 million will be given to Jewish communities to tackle what Rishi Sunak called utterly sickening rise in anti-Semitism in recent months. The government funding totalling £72 million will give the Jewish community dedicated security and protection and tackle anti-Semitism. Nearly 200 schools and more than 250 synagogues have been able to hire more security guards. Speaking last night, the Prime Minister said that the rise in racist attacks meant that the whole fabric of our nation is under threat. And the latest migrant stats have been published, showing illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. Small boat arrivals in 2023 have been down 36% since last year, and there were 5 times higher boat returns. Illegal migration in 2023 was 1/3 fewer than in 2022. However, there were 3.4 million entry clearance visas granted in 2023. That's 20% higher than the year before. And hotels for asylum seekers are costing the taxpayer £15 million a day, with Labour accusing the government of blowing its £1 billion budget. Home Office figures suggest the government spent £4.3 billion more of taxpayer money than budgeted on asylum support last year. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said this demonstrated the complete chaos in the asylum system left by the Conservatives. Dame Esther Rantzen is campaigning for a fresh debate on a vote for legalising assisted dying in the UK, saying the current law is a mess. She recently revealed she had joined the Dignitas Assisted Dying Clinic in Switzerland after she was diagnosed with lung cancer. It follows a report which warned that the government must consider what to do if the law is changed in other parts of the UK. The issue is currently being considered in Jersey and the Isle of Man, both of which are British Crown dependencies. Some members of the public expressed their opinion on the issue.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be. How feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer?
And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
At 10:07, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thank you for getting in touch. We've got these immigration figures which landed this morning. Rob has said the Border Force, what are they doing? They're providing a taxi service for illegals from Calais. Jackie says the Border Force have become water taxis, Uber rides for migrants. And Mel said with the numbers issued today showing an increase in low-skilled workers for social care, we should be investigating the fraudulent entries for non-existent care homes. Interesting point.
As I said, they're a welcoming committee, aren't they?
It feels like...
They're not turning any of the boats back.
No.
Now, sure.
No, you go ahead.
No, go on, please.
He's waiting for me to propose.
I'm flipping not. I'm praying she doesn't.
As is the 29th
Because I'd have to be very Uncle Ant and say thank you and no thank you.
Yeah, he says that. Right, latest migration figures. Small boat arrivals were down since last year, but overall legal migration has increased by 20%, with 3.4 million visas granted in 2023. Can we really afford to house more people?
No, it's especially bad in Northern Ireland, where the migration rate has doubled over the last decade, and it's now causing serious tensions within communities. Our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, has this report.
At the end of April 2023, Ireland's immigration was up by 31%. And over a decade, Northern Ireland's has doubled, with South Belfast being the most diverse. Tracy Kelly is a DUP Belfast City Councillor who deals with the issues in this area on a daily basis.
Over the last few years, it's changed dramatically. I've grown up in this community and I've seen a massive change, especially with regards to our schools and our houses and doctors' appointments, etc. Communities are really struggling with these issues, and I'd say over the last 3 to 4 years, especially since COVID, it's got dramatically worse.
Many in these housing estates depend on family support, with up to 4 generations living within streets of one another. Waiting lists for social housing in South Belfast is now over 2,500. Some immigrants that have already been housed in contracted units is over 1,000.
We have working class communities like Sandy Row, like the Donegal Pass, who are blending in with others who are coming here to work and live and mix. But there is also an issue when there's too many people who can't get housed. That seems to be the main issue that I deal with. When people in their own community who've been born and reared here have to move away because there's a lack of housing, that causes a wee bit of resentment, and unfortunately sometimes that resentment is going to people who have migrated here.
Given Northern Ireland's troubled past, the conversation around immigration was never on the agenda. But when you're dealing with communities that are still struggling with their own history, identity and culture, and even global alliances, is it wise to introduce those that are seeking a new way of life with their own culture and traditions to working class and post-conflict areas? Takura Makoni represents the African community of Northern Ireland.
I would presume mostly 99% of asylum seekers or migrants and refugees coming to this part of the world would have very little knowledge about the internal dynamics in Northern Ireland. So you find out it's almost like you're thrown in the deep water. To have the cognizance to say, here, I need to pick up that I'm living on a peace line, and these guys don't like those guys, and maybe these guys can tolerate me and those ones won't. You don't have any idea of that. It'll take you up to 10 years to get a real sense of that, because remember, you're focused on trying to rebuild your life.
To avoid further tensions, should government be looking at the placement of those refugees and migrants? Dougie Beattie, GB News, South Belfast.
Fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's happening all over the United Kingdom, isn't it?
We're joining the studio now as former First Minister for Northern Ireland, Dame Arlene Foster. We found that really interesting, Arlene. It's something obviously you're incredibly familiar with. How bad are those tensions? Because I'm playing devil's advocate for a minute. You could say, well, that's a good thing that people are arriving who don't have that history of tension and conflict. Does that help to abate some of that residual tension?
Well, I know this area very well. My mother's from South Belfast, and unfortunately, inner South Belfast has a lot of social deprivation, and so they're coping with that. They're coping with the legacy of the Troubles and paramilitarism, and then on top of that, a new community comes in, and that new community, as you've heard from Councillor Kelly, are perceived to be getting priority in relation to housing, in relation to GB services. And so then resentment builds up, and that needs to be dealt with. I think what the government should be really concentrating on, and I was visiting a centre in Dungannon just last week, actually, of trying to bring about inclusion so that people aren't separate. They're actually working together, and they're trying to understand each other's cultures. And you heard the African chap there saying that, you know, people come in here, they've no idea about the Troubles, they've no idea about peace lines, they've no idea about what's going on. So for them to understand and for us to understand them from the Northern Ireland perspective, I think there's a lot of work needs to be done.
In Southern Ireland, Arlene, we've talked about this before, there's been flashpoints,
Sure.
There's been civil unrest, riots, disturbances. Has that happened yet in Northern Ireland?
No, it hasn't.
Is the fear that it could?
Well, I don't think it will, because I think people genuinely just want to get on with their lives. But I think what Tracy is talking about there, Councillor Kelly, is that there are difficulties in certain communities that are already socially deprived and already struggling are then brought about. There's another layer added onto that, and government needs to be very much aware of that. They can't just ignore it and say, oh, everything's fine, and that's what's happening in Dublin, of course. Government don't want to talk about migration, they don't want to talk about the problems, but I think it would be much better if people talked about that and tried to find solutions for it.
It's the problem that's being replicated all over the country. We discovered just a couple of weeks ago 16,000 homes being made available for asylum seekers and illegal migrants. And there are 1.2 million people on the social housing waiting list.
Yes.
It just doesn't feel right.
No, it doesn't feel right, and therein lies the tension piece. As I say, in Northern Ireland, you have the added piece of paramilitarism and the Troubles, which certainly doesn't help. And I mean, I think one of the fears is that the paramilitaries then target people who come in, newcomers that come into Belfast and other areas of Northern Ireland and say, you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, echoes of what happened here, you know, in the 50s and 60s, you know, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, that sort of thing. And you certainly don't want to be going down that line.
Can we ask you about this football manager who got into trouble this week saying "good girl," and then apparently this is a Northern Irish kind of just a lingo that is normal and shouldn't be taken as an insult.
He's a Celtic manager.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be known to be a big fan of Brendan Rodgers because he's a Celtic manager. But look, here's the reality. When I was a solicitor, I had a client that didn't call me by my name. He always just called me "good girl." Good girl, good girl, good girl. And I didn't take offence at it. It was just the lingo. And then there was another, I remember, victims campaigner, very high-profile victims campaigner, when I was First Minister, used to say, how are you, girl? Are you keeping well, girl?
Yeah.
And you were First Minister at the time?
I was First Minister at the time. Look, it's not a sexist thing. It's just the way people speak. Depending on the context, it could be seen to be a little bit, you know, condescending, I have to say.
Is there a male equivalent, though? Because that's normally... And they would say...
Good lad.
Good lad. Good lad.
Yeah.
Good lad.
Well, then it's not sexist.
Well, a lot of Liverpool people say that, good lad. I've got a guy who trains me, and he calls me lad.
Yeah.
And I've been called lad for 40, 45 years.
You know, there's something nice about being called a girl when you're 53 years of age.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
We quite like it.
Just quickly on extra security that's being announced for MPs, £31 million being spent. In the House of Lords, there's some very high-profile people. Is security good enough, do you think, for members of the upper house?
Well, I wasn't there last Wednesday when that awful pressure came upon the House of Parliament, but I haven't spoken to
Just when they put up that outrageous...
Yeah, and I mean,
sea.
they were actually shouting into people's faces as they were trying to get into the House of Lords and House of Commons, and it was very scary, very intimidating, particularly for women and particularly for those from the Jewish community. So I do think there's a real need for a review of security and protection, not just for MPs, which of course is important, particularly in their constituencies. We've spoken about this, you know, when that dreadful murder of David Amos took place. We spoke about it then. But also Lords need protection as well, because some of them are quite high profile and could be targeted because they're just walking about the streets.
And also there's a lot of people who work there, the staff, who get caught up in it.
Have you ever been threatened walking out of Westminster, or have you ever had people...
Yeah, well, during the Brexit debate, and I was quite high profile because we were involved in the confidence and supply agreement at that time. I was walking out of Parliament one evening quite late with a colleague, and there were some Remain protesters there, and they quite intimidatingly walked beside me for quite a distance. Now, thankfully, I had a colleague with me, number one, and I just kept walking, and eventually they peeled off. Late at night, and Parliament does sit late at night sometimes, people know that and they stay outside and wait about, and that can be quite worrying.
Scary. OK, Arlene, thank you so much. We've got some breaking news to bring you, actually. We've just learnt that one of the hairy bikers, I believe it is, has died.
Oh, that's sad.
Dave Myers, 66 years old, very young.
Too young.
But we will bring you a little more on that when we hear it. That's just broken news. Right, we are moving on. I think it's time for a quick break. After the break, we're going to be looking a little bit more with this Sarah Everard inquiry. The poor girl, of course, who was murdered at the hands of the police officer. What has the report concluded? And we're going to have Sam Lister and Carol Malone in the studio as well. Don't go anywhere.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Yeah. Very good morning. It's 10:21. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, and also in the studio, Daily Express political editor
making a lot of
Sam Liston,
and making a lot of noise on the side camera.
You always say that, but you make way more than me. But anyway,
right. Do you want to have a little moment to sort of get out some of the frustration and the sort of therapy of Prince Harry losing?
I want a lot of time to get me frustration over Prince Harry. OK, so he loses.
Therapeutic.
So he loses the court battle yesterday. This was about a decision made in 2020 where his security arrangements changed because he had said he was no longer going to be a working royal. Now, it was explained to him at the time what that would mean to his security arrangements. He was told. However, he seems to have not understood that. He's not very bright. And he spent the last 2 years trying to overturn that. Now, he was told yesterday by the Ravik had made the decision, this is the body that decides who gets the special security, that he's not going to have it. And, you know, I was reading some of the stuff from his lawyers. One, his lawyer said he got a threat from Al-Qaeda. Well, I'd like to see that threat. I'd like to know if there's any intelligence data on that threat. In fact, I've said that, and I know there isn't. So if there was a real threat to him, I would say fine. But if Harry or his family have a target on their back from Al-Qaeda, which I don't believe for a second, who put it there?
He did.
He did.
By bragging.
In Spare, when he wrote that he'd killed 25 Taliban soldiers. And everything that he's written is down to him. So if he does have a target on his back, it's down to him. But, you know, he was saying that he didn't want special or preferential treatment. He absolutely does. That's exactly what he's asking for. He's a non-working royal who wants the privileges of a working royal. And it's exactly what the Queen said to him. Remember? When she was alive, she said...
Not half in,
She said, you can't have one foot in and one foot out. You're either working royal or you're not, and if you're not, live with the consequences.
The thing is, God forbid, if anything did happen to him, I don't think there would be many people saying, well, you asked for this because it was in a book, Sam.
Yeah, there would be hell to pay, wouldn't there?
Wouldn't there?
And I think I've always been slightly charitable to Harry. More charitable than Carol.
Why?
Yeah, I know it's not a fashionable view on this panel, or indeed in Fleet Street, or actually indeed in the country, but I do feel a bit Actually, you know, I do understand this is a man who, as a child, lost his mother.
Oh, so have lots of people said.
Not in the same way. And so I can actually sympathise with him being paranoid about security. I think that is legitimate.
Just remind people why she died in that tunnel, Pat, Sam. Nothing to do with not having a protection officer. She had a protection officer in the car.
That is true.
Who survived.
Yeah. And she had a drunk driver.
And she had a drunk driver's body was filled with... And the car wasn't terribly safe. She had the protection officer was in the front seat.
But I can see how that would make you paranoid about your security, your wife's security, and the security of your children.
Sam. He's a very, very rich man.
But that is a very fair point,
when
actually.
he's in America,
he
can have his own protection, and they'll be armed, because everybody's armed in America. Even children are armed in America. But when he came here to see his father, telling us all in advance he was coming, so everybody knew...
That's part of the problem.
Told everybody
he tells everyone.
He had the full panoply of royal security. Now, he didn't need to... They didn't need to provide that, because it wasn't an official royal visit. He was going to his dad. He could have gone privately, couldn't he, to Sandringham, gone in a private side...
No one would have known he was here.
He wants guns. He wants armed protection.
Because it makes him feel important.
Yes, but the thing is, the Metropolitan Police are not guns for hire. This is the point.
Right.
These are highly trained men and women, and they're not guns for hire, and their services have to be allocated to... Like the Prime Minister has his services allocated by them. But this is a guy who, you know, there was a paper came out this morning who'd said, when he was told he'd been refused security back in 2020, he said, I demand to know the names of the people who... Well, what's he going to do? Put them in the tower? He knew this was the deal, and yet what was he going to do? Terrorise them? Harass them? He can't...
Name and shame them?
He cannot take the word no. He pretended... You remember that phrase he said, I want to be an ordinary person, don't call me the prince, call me Harry. No, he wants to be called Harry when it suits him, but he wants to be treated like a prince for the rest.
And I think that is completely fair, but I do think, you know, you have to have a little bit of sympathy, surely.
None. Not a job.
Just me and you, Beth.
Honestly.
Not a job.
No fear of anyone drowning in milk of human kindness on this side of the
I will say, one of my esteemed lobby colleagues did joke yesterday that actually commiserations to Prince Harry for being the only person who's ever lost a legal challenge against the Home Office, which I think probably is.
This is so useless.
It's so useless. He's absolutely useless.
For purpose.
Completely.
We have to remember, Prince William lost his mum too in those horrific circumstances, and has not turned out to be the same kind of man as his brother has. His brother was consumed with bitterness and bile and hatred.
And he's got this lovely wife and kids. Get
she's
on with your
gorgeous,
life.
yeah.
Well, lovely to him, not to me.
I'm being ironic, Pierce.
No, I don't think I'd be on her list, Christmas card list.
Right, should we talk about this West End play?
Oh, God.
Get to this. So this is a play called Slave Play, Sam, starring Kit Harington. I don't know who Kit Harington is.
Big in Game of Thrones. Very big in Game of Thrones, yeah.
And the playwright has said that for 2 nights, this will have a black-only audience because it is necessary to radically invite them in with initiatives that say you're invited, specifically you, because not enough people of colour go to the theatre.
This is about apparently removing the white gaze. So to make people who are
gays,
not gays. Not gays. G-A-Z-E.
You've gone for it.
I'm not going into that play under any circumstances anyway. Let me tell you, not ever, not ever.
Gays. G-A-Z-E.
Just be clear.
Just because.
I don't know where to go now, Andrew.
The point being that it can be uncomfortable for black people to be in what is traditionally a very white area, which is the West End. Right. Very expensive. A lot of people socioeconomically can't afford to go.
There's a lot of white people can't afford to go to the theatre either, let me put it.
But the former Culture Minister, Ed Vaizey, this morning, he's a Conservative peer. He said that actually he supports this because when he was Culture Minister, he went to see a play that starred Lenny Henry, and he noticed that actually a lot of the audience was made up of black people, which stuck out to him because as a regular theatre-goer, normally the audience is predominantly white. And so he spoke to Lenny Henry afterwards and decided to do something about increasing the number of black people who go to theatres.
Well, how can you do that?
And so he thinks that this is a good idea, that you actually increase the... But I would say that actually, I do understand that actually, if you want to to make audiences more diverse, you do have to do something about that. But actually,
lower the
to have
prices.
segregation, this feels to me like going back to a part. Yeah, exactly. And surely this is not the way to solve it.
This is discrimination, pure and simple. I'm not even sure if this is legal. There was a couple of MPs in the papers today saying, "Is this even legal?" But you know, why?
Well, it wouldn't be if it was if they said only white.
Can you imagine if a white theatre said only white people for 2 nights?
Well, the play would be closed down. The Lord Chancellor would be involved. The culture sector would be involved. Questions in the House of Commons.
Would white people be inclined to go and see this play? I wouldn't. Not after this.
On principle, I wouldn't.
No,
I think a lot of people will now boycott it on principle. I think a lot of people feel very angry about this because if it was reversed, it would be an absolute unholy.
You can just imagine, can't
you? And so I think people do feel very passionate about
this. And who would be condemning it? Sadiq Khan would be the first. The Mayor of London would be the first to be up in this.
He wouldn't be the only one.
It shouldn't be happening in a West End.
Because it's a wrong thing to do. Whichever colour you are, it's a wrong thing. But this playwright says, you know, he actually says he's very excited by this, by banning white people from the theatre. He says that black people don't get to go to the theatre. They've been told they don't belong. No, they haven't.
Told them that?
Well, exactly. No one told them that. The bottom line is the theatre is prohibitive for people, black and white, unless you're on a certain salary.
That is very true. Very true.
For white working class people, what did you say? You went to see Cirque du Soleil the other week.
I took my godchildren and their mum, and it was there was 4 of us, and it cost £500.
I mean, that's outrageous.
Wow.
The phrase,
they weren't the best seats in the house.
I'm genuinely trying to open my mind to what positives there might be in this, because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the people who've made this decision. And this is the quote that they've said: "The idea of a blackout night is to say this is a night that we are specifically inviting black people to fill up the space, to feel safe with a lot of other black people in a place where they often do not feel safe."
You don't feel safe in a
theatre?
There's always going to not make them feel
what middle-class aggression. They're renowned for it.
Being stabbed to death in the 3rd row.
Group of people with Waitrose cards.
Some sort of posh ice cream, you know.
Don't go in the gods in case you fall over and break your neck. Is that what they're saying? I mean, that is ridiculous.
This is demonising white people. This is saying white people are aggressive to black people, and that's in this country. I mean, I know there are, I know that we're not always as good as we could be, but generally we bust a gut in this country in terms of equality, in terms of black and white.
To be tolerant.
We try really hard. We try more than most other countries, and the idea that white people were going to be aggressive to people in a West End theatre is beyond.
I suppose what he's done, of course, he's got huge publicity.
I mean,
yes, he has.
Great publicity, free publicity. Everyone's talking about it. Would everybody be talking about this play? Otherwise, I don't think so. So maybe it is a marketing ploy.
Kit Harington could have said, who is a very big house, big name, he's a big draw, I ain't doing this.
Yeah.
I would imagine he probably feels...
Are they going to replace the white members of the cast that night?
I mean,
no, they won't.
And he's very white, Kit Harington.
Well,
is he?
Yeah.
Oh, he's very white.
I presumed it was an all-black cast.
No.
I'm just going to...
You tie yourself in knots, don't you, to try and meet some kind of new... set of sensibilities, and actually surely the theatre is a shared experience, and if you are going to go to the theatre, and actually it is a middle-class experience on the whole, if you want to open up the theatre, you should be looking at trying to make tickets cheaper and all that kind of stuff to increase participation. But surely it's a shared experience and we should all be there together.
And it just really makes you wonder, I think there needs to be a bigger national conversation about what is the end game here in terms of diversity and inclusion. What are subsequent governments aiming for? Because presumably we are looking for a time, as Martin Luther King had said, about when it isn't about the colour of your skin, but it is your character that is the most important aspect of a person. And it feels like that's been reversed. We're going the other way.
We're marching backwards. We're marching backwards to those days where hotels were allowed to put up signs saying no black people allowed, where theatres were allowed to say no black people allowed. That was a hellish, regressive time. And this is a regressive, racist step. You know, what this theatre director said is actually racist. He's making the assumption that white people are going to upset black people just by their very presence in this theatre.
I never even think about who's sitting next to me.
No, exactly.
Unless
Why would
they're
you?
one of those noisy people.
Eating crisps.
Elbows out.
The only time I notice.
Right, so talking of noisy people, we've got to leave you two for now.
Yes, Carol.
But still to come this morning, Prince Harry appeals to the High Court after they say he doesn't need this extra police security. Does he have any chance of winning that? That and much more after your morning's news with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Bev. It's 10:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story. A major report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by former police officer Wayne Couzens is due to be published shortly. And we can take you now live to the inquiry.
The inquiry is, however, independent, and my report is a result of just over 2 years' work. Critically, this report contains 16 recommendations which are designed to help prevent a situation where anyone entrusted with the powers of a serving police officer abuses that trust in such a heinous way again. The fragility of public trust and confidence in policing affects us all, including those good police officers doing the right thing every day. It is time for all those with responsibility for policing to do everything they can to improve standards of recruitment, vetting and investigation. Wayne Couzens was never fit to be a police officer. Police leaders need to be sure there isn't another. Before I describe my findings and conclusions, I want to remember Sarah Everard, whose life was cut short by the most unimaginable cruelty. I also want to pay tribute to her loving family, who I've had the great privilege of getting to know over the last few years. I've been profoundly affected by their grief and their grace in their suffering. I've also been moved by the courage of those victims who gave evidence to the inquiry of their own experiences. I'm so grateful that they trusted us. I hope we have done them justice and that real change and improvement happens because of this report. I do not underestimate the strength speaking to the inquiry required of them. I make recommendations for improvements that need to be made to ensure that women feel safe when they report to the police. I hope that those writing about or giving an account of this publication will respect the privacy those victims deserve. I am grateful to all those who provided evidence to the inquiry and for the way organisations have cooperated with the inquiry's work. The terms of reference for Part 1 require me to establish the timeline of Couzens' career and relevant incidents. This includes investigating the circumstances of his vetting, transfer between police forces and his behaviour towards women. The timeline, together with the rest of the report, has been deliberately drafted to avoid victims of Couzens' crimes being identified. I've also chosen not to name individual officers relevant to Couzens' career, other than the very senior leaders who gave evidence to the inquiry. I did this because I wanted to encourage open and frank testimony from those that gave some very sensitive evidence. I've also not named individuals who could be criticised for their action or inaction. It is not part of my role to comment on those specific individuals, but I note that where relevant, there have already been separate misconduct proceedings. My job was to identify the systemic failings or problems that led to Couzens being able to commit his horrific crimes as an off-duty police officer. Sarah's murder by an off-duty police officer shocked the nation. It triggered a surge of discourse about women's safety in public spaces and started a tidal wave of reporting on police misconduct, particularly where officers misused their powers to commit sexual offences. What is already clear is how much damage Couzens has done to the social contract on which policing is based and how significant improvements are required. The evidence seen by the inquiry has shown that failures in recruitment and vetting meant Couzens was able to continue a policing career which should have been denied to him. Failures in investigations into allegations of indecent exposure meant opportunities to disrupt Couzens' offending and bring his policing career to a halt were missed. It is clear that Couzens carefully managed the impression he gave people of himself. This included the way he manipulated information on application forms and his troubled finances. It also included the way he shared his callous views towards women with only a very small group of like-minded people on a social media group. This all enabled him to target vulnerable women while operating in plain sight as an apparently unremarkable officer. However, the fact remains that 3 separate police forces allowed him the privilege of being a police officer when they could and should have stopped him. Wayne Couzens is a predatory sex offender and murderer. Evidence of his alleged offending, his preference for extreme and violent pornography, and his unmanaged debts date back nearly 20 years prior to Sarah's murder. The report explores this in detail, but I will draw your attention to some of the major red flags and missed opportunities to halt Wayne Couzens' career and bring him to justice. The inquiry has seen evidence that Couzens allegedly committed a very serious sexual assault against a child, barely in her teens, before his policing career even started. Problems with money also predated his career with the police. Couzens had substantial unsecured debt by the time he was arrested for Sarah's murder. At the same time, the Metropolitan Police Service were taking action to recover up to £15,000 that had been paid to him in error, and a year-long mortgage holiday was about to expire that month. These pressures undoubtedly affected his ability to serve as an authorised firearms officer at that time. I've seen evidence of Couzens' diverse and deviant sexual interests and understand these to be potential drivers for his offending. It is alleged that on a number of occasions, Couzens tried to show friends and colleagues pornography, including some of a violent and extreme nature. It is further alleged that on at least 2 occasions, he shared unsolicited photographs of his penis with a young woman, and that he paid female online retailers to masturbate into clothes and send them to him. Since his conviction for Sarah's abduction, rape and murder, Couzens has been convicted of further crimes of indecent exposure, one of which he had already been linked to while a serving police officer. Some further allegations were charged but remain on file. Couzens is also alleged to have possessed indecent images of children. He has not been convicted of this. Crucially, the report shows how police recruitment and vetting failed to spot red flags about Couzens' unsuitability. Red flags were repeatedly ignored, meaning he was granted the privilege of serving in 3 separate police forces, including as an authorised firearms officer, despite, for example, his history of excessive spending and personal debt. Vetting processes also missed other information, including linking Couzens to an incident of indecent exposure. Couzens failed at interview in his application for Kent Police in 2004. He joined Kent Special Constabulary as a volunteer constable in 2006, wearing the same uniform, carrying the same kit, and enjoying the same powers, including the power of arrest as a regular police officer. He was able to secure promotion to the grade of section officer, a position of authority comparable to a sergeant in the regular force. In a further application to join the regular Kent Police Force in 2008, Couzens failed to gain vetting clearance. Despite that vetting failure, Couzens was retained as a volunteer officer. When he applied to join the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, the CNC, Couzens' financial position was not given proper consideration. According to 2011 vetting guidance, he should have been refused vetting because he had an IVA, an individual voluntary arrangement, which is for those with debt wishing to avoid bankruptcy. Thames Valley Police, to whom his force vetting was outsourced, recommended that Couzens should not pass force vetting. This recommendation was not followed. The CNC gave inadequate weight to his financial history during the vetting process. In 2013, when he was serving as an authorised firearms officer with the CNC, there was an episode when Couzens was reported missing from home. The CNC were not informed of the report, thereby being denied an opportunity to explore or revisit his suitability for the office of constable. I make a recommendation to address this. Couzens' initial vetting when he applied to join the Metropolitan Police Service in 2018 was also flawed. The Metropolitan Police Service did not take into account all of the information that was available to them. The outcome of the Police National Database check on Couzens was recorded as no trace, when in fact there were relevant entries. These consisted of a reference to Couzens being reported missing from home in 2013 and to his car being linked to an allegation of indecent exposure in 2015. A check of the police national database was then not included in Cousins' risk assessment when he applied to be an authorised firearms officer with the Metropolitan Police Service in 2019. Had it been, Cousins' association with the allegation of indecent exposure in 2015 in Kent would have been revealed, providing a further opportunity to affect his application. The opportunity for the Met to refuse him clearance on the basis that his name was connected to an allegation of indecent exposure in 2015 was missed yet again. Repeated failures in recruitment and vetting meant that Cousins could enjoy the powers and privileges that accompany the role of police officer. He went on to use his knowledge of police powers to falsely arrest Sarah Everard. Even after Cousins' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor. Those offences were treated as low level by the investigating officers. Decisions to close some cases were taken early with minimal investigation. I am calling for a step change in the way police respond to indecent exposure cases. More research is needed to understand the link between this offence and the likely trajectory towards serious contact offending. And even without that trajectory, victims deserve to have their cases investigated properly each and every time. Attitudes towards the experience of those victimised by alleged incidents of exposure were not commensurate with the harm caused. In 2015, a member of the public telephoned Kent Police, having just seen a man driving a car while indecently exposing himself. This same witness gave the police the make, model, colour and registration number of the car, information that was confirmed by automatic number plate recognition cameras operating in the area. In almost no time, checks by the police identified Cousins as the registered keeper of the car. However, despite having his home address and knowing that he was the only male insured to drive the car, Kent Police closed the case and took no further action.
Well, she's only just started and already it's shocking. I mean, how... And she's saying he should never have been a police officer, should never have been a police officer. His liking for violent and extreme pornography and his history of alleged sexual offending dated back 20 years.
Unbelievable. That's Dame Eilish Angelioni, who has been charged with, tasked with conducting this report that she's reading to us there. Just looks like one mistake after another, after another.
And what's really...
The vetting procedure failed. He'd been in 3 police services and none of them picked
I remember he was off duty, he kidnapped her, raped her, murdered her under the false guise of an arrest. But what's really disturbing, she says in her report, without a significant overhaul, there's nothing to stop another Cousins operating in plain sight. And he'd been exposing himself to women and colleagues knew about his behaviour.
His diverse and deviant sexual fantasies, she said. Extraordinary. Let's talk to our Home Security Editor, Mark White, for more on this. Mark, we knew it was going to be bad, but it looks like she hasn't left any stone unturned there.
No, it's shocking stuff, and it's a catalogue of failures, not just affecting the Metropolitan Police, where he was, of course, a serving firearms officer within the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Command. He had also been recruited by the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, despite clearly indications in his background about issues with him being in severe debt, and, of course, those potential issues around offending as well. And Kent Police had recruited him initially as a special constable, a volunteer police officer in 2002. But then about 6 years later, when he applied to be a full-time regular member of that force, well, he failed those vetting checks for whatever reason. But that was never passed on to the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. He went on then to commit a number of offences which were not properly investigated. But even before that, Dame Angelini talks about offending behaviour that dated back to 1995 and included a serious sexual assault on a child barely in her teens. At that point, a number of other victims, according to Dame Angelini as well, who never came forward but have subsequently being interviewed as part of her investigation. But in terms of these other matters, this offending behaviour that then obviously escalated into the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard. Well, a notable offence was in 2015 when he was involved in a decent exposure while driving a vehicle in Dover in Kent. That was reported by a couple. They gave the police, Kent Police, the registration number of the vehicle, and inquiries by Kent Police had established who Wayne Couzens was. But according to Dame Angelini, that investigation was half-hearted. It was doomed to failure, she said from the start. Not just that one, but the later incidents of exposure as well in November of 2020, and then just a few weeks before the murder of Sarah Everard. Those are the offending behaviours that she says should be addressed, that police forces must in future take the likes of indecent exposure allegations much more seriously and investigate them properly as something that is owed, of course, to the victims, but also could potentially stop this escalating behaviour into more serious crimes. And then there's the vetting procedure as well, the vetting procedure that appeared to fail at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary and then failed at the Metropolitan Police as well.
Mark, there's a couple of things come to mind. The manifest failings in the vetting procedure, because this man, as Dame Angelini says, should never have been a police officer. And you do wonder when, for instance, that indecent exposure was complained of in 2015, the police investigation was risible at best. Was that perhaps because he was a special, he had a uniform, so they were, if you like, protecting their own?
Is also underway.
Well, yes, who knows what the motivation of the individual officers who investigated that alleged indecent exposure incident back in 2015 was. It may well have been a factor, the fact that he was attached to Kent Police as serving special constable at that time, and of course also working for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. But with regard to the vetting procedures, it wasn't just a failure at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary to look into his background, but also the Metropolitan Police. You heard there from Dame Angelini about checks that were made on the Police National Computer. Now, this is a database that holds all kinds of relevant information about previous offending behaviour. Now, in that Police National database on the Police National Computer were those incidents of the 2015 allegation of indecent exposure in Dover, and of course also issues about him disappearing, having gone missing. But those incidents, according to the vetting procedure, it said that nothing was found on the Police National Computer. So a series of failings.
It's extraordinary.
There's 16 recommendations in there, Mark, she says, which hopefully will make things easier. Is there one that strikes you in particular that jumps out at you?
Two, I think. One, that vetting procedures must be much more tighter, that they need to deep dive far more into the backgrounds of individuals applying to take on a role as police officers, and also those still in the job when they get re-vetted at periods during their police service. And then the other one is on this sexual offences such as indecent exposure. That must be investigated properly. And we understand actually that the police service will announce today that they are going to take these incidents of indecent exposure much more seriously. I'll give you an indication of how lax, in a way, that their investigations into indecent exposure have been thus far. There, on average, are 10,000 allegations of indecent exposure each year. Less than 6% of those result in a summons or a charge.
Amazing, isn't it?
I think what I was... thank you, Mark. Mark White there, bringing us a synopsis pretty much of what we said. I think what surprised me is how much she talks about his financial situation as well.
Which
how
put
much
him under huge pressure.
How much debt he had, and that his mortgage break was coming to an end at that particular time when he attacked Sarah Everard. And the implication being that the police should have known more about his financial situation. And she said the stress that it put him under.
And he was also in a very tense unit. He was in the diplomatic protection squad looking after royals and senior politicians, but also discovering that this shocking thing that he attacked a girl barely in her teens 20 years ago. Such a history of sexual abuse, and sending unsolicited photographs of his appendage to young women, buying soiled women's underwear online.
And if you're thinking, how does this happen? How is it possible? We're going to be talking to a former detective superintendent at the Met in just a moment to find out how it might have been effectively ignored or covered up. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Yeah, because that's what...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi, I'm Alex Burkill, here with your latest GB News weather forecast. It's going to be a wet day across much of the southeast. Elsewhere, plenty of showers and some strong winds because we have a relatively deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. But, like I said, lots of rain in the southeast because of a waving front that isn't going to go anywhere particularly fast, so some heavy, persistent rain for much of the day here. Elsewhere, something a little bit drier, but plenty of showers, particularly across much of Scotland. Some of these will be heavy, perhaps even thundery with some hail, and also wintry over the higher ground, and watch out for those strong winds too. It is going to be a chilly day for many, with temperatures near normal for the time of year, but in the southeast a little bit milder, highs of around 11 or 12 Celsius. In the southeast, that rain will gradually clear away towards the east as we go through the end of the day. Some clearer, drier weather for a time for many places, but still a scattering of showers across northern parts, and then later on as we go through the early hours of tomorrow morning, we're going to see some heavy rain and hail snow pushing into the southwest. Where we have clear skies, temperatures will take a bit of a drop, so some frost, some icy patches, also some fog and freezing fog to watch out first thing tomorrow morning. In the southwest and across parts of Wales, watch out for the heavy rain and hail snow could cause some travel disruption, some significant spray, and all that wet weather will spread to other parts of England and Wales as we go through the day, bringing some snow over higher ground. Best chance of staying dry and bright will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for many it is going to be another chilly day, temperatures lower than today in the southeast. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 29th of February, leap year day. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the inquiry into Sarah Everard's killer has found that the police had multiple chances to stop Wayne Couzens before he eventually committed his awful crimes. Has this eroded our faith in the police?
And the latest immigration figures show that over 100,000 people are still waiting for a decision on an asylum application in the UK. Has the government really been able to tackle the massive backlog? No.
Prince Harry will appeal the High Court's decision to downgrade his security status. Is he wasting the police time, or does he still face serious security threats?
And Rishi Sunak has summoned police bosses to Downing Street to urge them to use their powers to crack down on protesters' intimidation or risk losing Britain streets to what he calls mob rule.
And we're going to talk to a former female police officer, but she's still female, but you know what I mean, she's a former police officer, about the Sarah Everard report and about what that tells us, because we were sitting there going, how is it possible? How did nobody within the police force alert the necessary authorities to get this man taken out of that position?
There were so many red flags. In fact, he should never, according to the author's report, have been a police officer in the first place. He should never have got through any vetting procedure.
Amazing. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. Let us know your thoughts. How is it possible that that can happen in the last 20 years in this country? First, though, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Bev. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Couzens, should never have been a police officer, according to an inquiry, and chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored and missed. The 33-year-old was murdered on her way home in Clapham in South London by the serving police officer in March 2021. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Eilish Anglioni was warned without a radical overhaul of the police practices and culture, there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. Miss Everard's family has welcomed the findings, saying she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car.
Even after Couzens' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance,
The Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
Rishi Sunak has warned that the UK is descending into mob rule as he tells police to use their powers to protect MPs from threats. This comes after a £31 million security package was announced to provide politicians with dedicated police to liaise with over safety concerns. Concerns are growing about MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office says elected representatives will have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with. Schools Minister Damien Hinds told GB News it's important to defend democracy.
It's really important to protect our democracy. That's not just members of Parliament, of course, but it includes members of Parliament. We have a representative democracy, and it's really important that that can go about its business, that individuals can go about their business, and, by the way, their staff members and families without fear. So I do think it's right that there is this focus. The police obviously do fantastic work, and we're all very grateful to them. And yes, I do welcome that focus that the Prime Minister has brought to protecting our democracy, our democratic process, and democratic participation.
Now, the latest migrant statistics show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. Government figures show small boat arrivals in 2023 have been down 36% since last year, and there were 5 times higher boat returns. Illegal migration in 2023 was 1/3 fewer than in 2022. However, there were 3.4 million entry clearance visas granted in 2023. That's 20% higher than the year before. Dame Esther Ranson is campaigning for a fresh debate on a vote for legalising assisted dying in the UK, saying the current law is a mess. She recently revealed she had joined the Dignitas assisted dying clinic in Switzerland after she was diagnosed with lung cancer. It follows a report which warned that the government must consider what to do if the law is changed in other parts of the UK. The issue is currently being considered in Jersey and the Isle of Man, both of which are British Crown dependencies. Some members of the public expressed their opinion on the issue.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be. How feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer?
And the inquest into the death of Prince and Princess Michael of Kent's son-in-law will open tomorrow. Buckingham Palace announced Thomas Kingston, who was married to Lady Gabriella, died suddenly at an address in the Cotswolds on Sunday. In a joint statement, she paid tribute to her 45-year-old husband, describing his death as a great shock to the whole family. Gloucestershire Coroner's Court confirmed the inquest will open tomorrow at 2 p.m. And Harry Biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking duo partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at home with his family. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
It's 11:06 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, that inquiry report has found that Wayne Couzens had never been a police officer with predatory sexual behaviour dating back 20 years before the rape and murder of Sarah Everard.
That's right. Opportunities to stop him were repeatedly ignored. Home Secretary James Cleverly has said the actions of Wayne Couzens were not a reflection on the majority of dedicated police officers, but Sarah Everard was failed in more ways than one by the people who were meant to keep her safe.
Well, joining us in the studio now is former Met Police Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury, who's a great friend of this programme. Shabnam, you were in the police for many years. Can you believe half of what you've read about in this report about the missed opportunities? And with the conclusion she's made, the author of the report, she never been a copper in the first place.
You know, I want to say that I'm not shocked, but I am devastatedly shocked. It's so horrific reading to think that this behaviours, these red flags, the failing of the vetting processes date back more than 20 years. And the level of this individual's behaviour is absolutely shocking to the core. I am so sad for the women and the girls, and I'm so heartbroken for, the family of Sarah Everard.
It's going to be terrible for them to read this because it shouldn't have happened. He should never have been in that position. She only got into that car because he was a plainclothes copper.
Yeah, and also, look, let's not forget that he'd already been, not necessarily named as a suspect, but he'd been involved in indecent exposures. His registration number of his vehicle had been given to the police officers. And I think, as you say, thousands of dedicated, hard-working police officers. But unfortunately, there's a culture within policing where this kind of misogyny is so embedded that it's going to be really difficult for Sir Mark Rowley to untangle it. Talking about good officers, but you're also talking about a rotten barrel of officers here.
You're clearly getting quite emotional then, Shabnam, talking about this. Why is that? Just explain to us, as a police officer, why it's so upsetting.
Look, when you join the police service, you join to protect and to serve, and you want to give support to everybody, particularly vulnerable people. As a police officer, you have a badge, and that's a powerful, a powerful badge, really, and that your job is to go out there and protect these women. I am so gutted that Sarah Everard fell into the hands of this predatory, violent, vile individual, and now the police have got to clear up this mess in terms of how they move forward, particularly around their vetting, their training and their systems and their processes.
And of course, he flashed his badge at her. That's why she got in the car. That police badge that you were so proud to have.
And will all police officers feel it as personally as you do?
I think so. I would not deny for a second that there will be police officers that will be reading this that will be horrified, but there'll also be those police officers that need to check themselves, because when you display such serious red flag behaviours, remember he showed pornographic images to his colleagues, and that kind of behaviour are all the kind of red flags that make you realise that there's something not right with this officer. We need to address this.
So what happens? Just help us to understand. You're sat round having a cup of tea between cases and maybe in the office, and he comes in and he goes, look at this video. He's shown it to other police officers. Why are they not alert to the fact that that could be a red flag? What's going on psychologically for those police officers, do you think?
Well, there will be those officers who work in the kind of departments that he worked in. He worked alongside, not necessarily alongside him, but he worked in the same department as David Carrick. OK, so these kind of behaviours were the norm. He'd walk in there. There might be other officers there, might be female officers, there might be male officers that feel incredibly uncomfortable, that want to challenge it. But when you've got someone that's got that level of service, that kind of kudos within an environment...
Because he's a part of the diplomatic protection squad, looking after ministers and royals.
Exactly.
Armed.
And they have like 4 hours on, 4 hours off. They have a significant amount of time just sitting there, going through their phones, going through their laptops, doing whatever it is that they want to do. And you get a culture where you feel comfortable within the company that you're in. And there's a saying, isn't there, know your audience. And he knew his audience, and either some were too scared to challenge or they just let him get on with it as they did.
It's quite clear from the report that incidents of indecent exposure are not taken seriously by the police because Mark White, our Home Security, had said if there was 12,000 cases last year, only about 10% were actually investigated. There was again and again this man was indecently exposing himself, and it wasn't taken seriously, clearly.
Well, let me just give you an example. In the last week, I think it was, there's an organisation, I think it might have been Sussex, I don't want to get it wrong, but a police officer exposed himself when he was on a night out with a bunch of colleagues, and the panel in that investigation gave him a final written warning, and they recorded on there it's a minor crime. So that goes to show you that even post what's gone on with Wayne Couzens, the fact is that is still not being taken seriously.
Amazing. Let's just see what Mark Rowley has said.
He's the Metropolitan Police Commissioner.
In just a moment, the most senior police officer in the country. He says that the Angelini report was an urgent call for action for all of us in policing, and the service must go further and faster to gain back the trust of the public in the wake of Couzens' crimes. Shabnat, does that statement go far enough for you? What else would you like for him possibly to have said?
Well, look, Sir Mark is doing his best to root out the rotten apples within the policing. I've never seen so many people being either sacked, charged, convicted of serious sexual crimes. But he just can't arrest his way out of a situation. This isn't just about going out and arresting those officers. There are good officers within policing, but he has got a culture that is well and truly embedded within the framework of policing that he now has got to change. You cannot have officers that display those type of behaviours continuing to operate without being challenged, and you cannot have the vetting processes that are officers don't even meet the supervisors. Everything is done online, so that has got to be some urgent reform around that as well.
How do the police get the confidence back? Will young women ever trust the police? She got into that car because he was a copper.
Well, the Met Police are still in special measures at the moment. They've got a very, very, very long way to go. They need to work with many, many groups out there. They need to demonstrate some of the stuff that they are doing, to be fair, in terms of rooting out these rotten apples. They've got to change their vetting processes. Rome wasn't built in a day, and if Sir Mark thinks that within the next year or two that he's going to restore trust and confidence, I think he's got a long, long way to go.
Just to go back to that point you made then about the fact that the vetting procedure is now done on Zoom. And when did that start, and why hasn't that changed?
Well, it's not a question of just done on Zoom, it's done online. So that means you answer a significant load of questions online. So if I said to you, have you got any affiliation to any sort of neo-Nazi groups, or do you often watch pornography, and you say no, they'll take that on face value.
That's the vetting process.
That's the vetting process.
That's not a vetting process.
And the problem is, the Met have got to go back to the old style of policing in terms of vetting. That means going round, knocking on doors, speaking to neighbours, getting a better review and understanding of the individual that they're going through. This officer here, this former murderer, police officer, had debts.
Yeah.
That's a red flag in itself.
But when did that stop? When did we stop knocking on doors and talking to the potential applicants and make it a tick box exercise?
Well, I think the processes have changed a long time ago, but when we had COVID, it was a very good way to then just get everything done online, and I think the Met didn't go back to some of the old processes. Now what they've got is they've got a pot of officers who have not been vetted in the last few years properly, who are now sitting in policing, who are being churned out and churned out. But the big problem that the Met has got are the people like David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, who are already well and truly embedded in policing, operate within that kind of culture, hide in plain sight, and they're the ones that he needs to root out.
Is there an issue as well, Shabnam, because, of course, we know disastrous decision when she was Home Secretary and David Cameron was Prime Minister to get rid of 20,000 Metropolitan Police officers. Still can't believe a Conservative government did that, but they did. They've now restored most of those numbers back, if not all of them. Do you think they were cutting corners in the rush to get the 20,000 back?
Well, huge cutbacks meant less police officers, it meant less police staff, it meant less opportunities to vet people properly.
Yeah.
There was a whole range of things that they literally... It wasn't that they can necessarily cut corners, they just changed their processes, which meant that they could cut corners ethically and then just carry on through the process. And now this is a mess that the policing is in. And, sorry, I'd just like to say... You may have increased police officer numbers by 20,000. You've only uplifted back to the original numbers. We know that Sir Mark Rowley and the Met Police are in a critical crisis because they can't get people to recruit into policing. They've had 6 applications for the Firearms Command because some of the issues that they've got facing.
Of course. Yeah, why would you, if you think you're going to be prosecuted for doing your job?
And this is also a problem, is that policing doesn't look like an appealing career to school leavers now, does it? It looks like hard work. It looks like you'd be out in all weathers. And we get such a bad press that maybe there's a younger generation coming through who just won't want to be police officers.
Absolutely. Look, I've got 3 nephews in the police. I had one that started last week on foot patrol. So, you know, he's very young and hopefully he will be part of the change that needs to be seen within policing. even now, as I sit here, I don't want to say to people, don't join policing, because I want them to join policing. I think it's crucial that they get more people within policing, but they get the right people, they do it appropriately, they do it so that it's ethical, and that they're not then churning out officers who are dirty, rotten apples.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, I think we are moving on for now.
Thank you so much for coming in. And,
great to see you.
Yeah, and we'll continue to update with this report, because it is a complete shocker.
Yeah.
There were just so many opportunities, and the central thing is Wayne Cuddy should never have been a police officer in the first place.
Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbnews@gbnews.com. Still to come, though, our panel will be back with us, tackling everything that we've heard from the Everard inquiry and giving us their take on whether it is possible for the police to win back your trust. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me this. Lovely to see you, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it, as you know, Eamon. You can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong, to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you, that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as we said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(11:21). You're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner. They're back here, the panel: Sam Lister, Daily Express political editor, and Karen Malone, the journalist and broadcaster. We've got to ask.
You nearly forgot me. You nearly forgot my name there. I saw you stuttering over
Too
it.
long. That's how long.
Yes.
Let's ask you first of all to react to these absolutely shocking revelations that are coming out of the report. Sam, you're a young woman. You live in London.
I just think, obviously, the family have been. They've not been very public since, obviously, Sarah's death, and you can completely understand that. But they have issued a statement, and they did say it is only because this man was a policeman in his officer's uniform that Sarah would have ever got into a car with him. And that is the crux of it, isn't it? And I think actually...
And he used lockdown as an excuse, didn't he?
Yeah.
To say you shouldn't be out on the street and...
And it's just... it chills me to the bone, as it must do anybody, because actually, if you cannot trust the police, who can you trust? And I think I'm always a great defender of the police. They have a terrible job. It's very, very hard, especially nowadays. They do an awful lot of social work as well as policing. It's incredibly difficult, incredibly high-pressured. But we've had so many difficult cases, tragic, horrible murders like this, that it does reflect on everybody in the police service. And I feel sorry for all those other officers as well, whose reputation is now dragged down because of this man. And I just feel really sorry for the family, actually. I mean, they've issued this statement. I think that's the first I've heard from them since it initially happened. And it just must be horrendous. I think we all just feel great compassion for them.
Yeah. Malone?
Yeah, you know, this report says he should never have been a police officer.
Yeah.
Did we really need a long, drawn-out report to tell us that? We didn't, you know. He's been committing offences in plain sight of other officers since 1995. And I just think it's shocking, Sam says, for the parents to now know all of this, that he was doing this for this long. But you just had Shabnam in there talking about, you know, there are lots of other police officers who will now have to check themselves. And yes, they will, because they let this happen.
Yeah.
He would have been stopped a long time ago. Sarah Everard would have still been alive if those coppers who saw him doing what he did, exposing himself, looking at vile videos, if someone had reported him. And that kind of culture still exists within the police force. Wayne Couzens being jailed has not changed that. It still exists. And I just think the police have got to get tougher on this. They really have. You know, and I'm really disappointed in Mark Rowley as a police chief in general. I thought he was going to get really tough. And yes, we know now that a couple of police officers are being prosecuted every week. It's not enough. It's endemic in the force itself. So today, it's a terrible day for the family. You know, I know now that if a copper ever says to me, get into my car, I never will.
No,
and they'd have to arrest me 14 times to do that. I'm not getting into a car with a copper. And I know that's not fair on the good coppers, but I just won't do it now
and if you
because of Wayne Couzens.
Remember at the time of the advice, if a woman is concerned, the advice was when the police flag a bus.
Yeah.
Flag a bus stand.
Yeah.
What, is the bus driver going to stop?
Yeah. No, he's not. He's going to run you over.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
that's how desperate it is in this country of ours.
That's what we've come to.
But the bit I'm still baffled by is how many times people that he worked with must have been aware that he was a wrong-un and he had nicknames suggesting that.
I mean, his nicknames.
There was obviously this, like, deficit of accountability. That seems to be the phrase of 2024. Why? Was it the fact that the police, that in a bit like the army, you need to rely on each other, you need to be loyal to each other, you need to know that you might go and risk your lives together, and therefore you don't expose people's predilections. Maybe
showing
they could
showing violent porn, repeatedly flashing, and clearly the police have not taken flashing seriously, and yet there was a clear sign this was a sexual predator.
You know, and Bev talks about, you know, this bond that partners, cops have with each other, and that's all very well, but not when they're perverts and predators and would-be killers and would-be, you know, sex perverts, not when they're like that. You know, a cop has to have, as well as being, you know, having a loyalty to his partner, he's got to have a sense of what's right and wrong, and if he doesn't have that, he shouldn't be in the police force. He shouldn't be in the human race, frankly, but, you know, he shouldn't be in the police force. And as you said, time after time after time, he got away with stuff. That's got to change, and I don't know how it's going to. You know, root and branch reform, we keep hearing that phrase, but how is it going to happen and when is it going to... This report, you know, the truth of it is, this report isn't going to make a damn bit of difference because it doesn't tell us anything we didn't know. Of course, you'd never been in the police force. We know that. Multiple offences, we knew that already. So what's going to change?
Yeah.
And that's what the family
vetting
needs.
procedure, what Shabnam was telling us about the vetting procedure is astonishing, that it's an online form.
Incredible. Say what you like.
And you just fill it in. But there must be more to it than that.
How did they not know he had deep financial problems?
I think this is a big thing, isn't it? And actually, I think part of the problem is that we saw, obviously, a lot of experienced officers being basically kind of pensioned off when
Theresa May.
when we obviously were going through the kind of austerity years, and there was a great deal of experience lost there. And by recruiting another 20,000 officers in recent years to make up for that shortfall, they have had to go through this kind of like lowering of standards almost to bring in new people into the force. But those people are young, they're not properly vetted, they don't have that experience, they don't have the gravitas, they don't have the ability to take on people who are the wrong uns in the team.
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem, isn't it?
Should we do this front page of The Express, as you both hear from The Express?
Yeah.
Esther Ranson is fighting for a campaign for assisted dying. And it feels like this comes up every now and then, Carol, doesn't it, on the news headlines, and then it disappears and goes away.
Yeah.
It's something different in the air now. That
Well, what's happened this week is MPs met. There was a committee that met to decide whether this should go before Parliament for a vote. And the committee haven't come up with any clear decision on this. You know, Dame Esther and our paper, which have been brilliant, are running this campaign called Dignity in Dying. And every day we're banging the message home why this is a good thing. Every day we have people, you know, I mean, David Dimbleby was the latest one to join.
Yeah.
To say this is inhuman that people have to become criminals to help people they love die, and they're not even allowed to do it in this country. But Dame Esther today is very upset because she's saying, you know, this is just so disappointing. They've come to no clear decision about whether this can go to a vote or not.
vote.
Why don't... What are they so scared of? Why don't they put it to a vote, Sam?
Because it would be a free vote, Sam.
It would be a
Nobody's
free
gonna whip
vote.
It, so it's not there's no party political advantage for any major parties.
I think it is one of those issues that is so difficult to come to a kind of big conclusion on, because people have such different experiences. But obviously, many people fear the impact this could have on people who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
But people who have been through very difficult times with their family members obviously feel very strongly about it. So it would be a free vote. I took some readers into Number 10 last week to meet the Prime Minister, and one of them was a campaigner, Matt Ryan. He gave an incredibly powerful account of the way his family has suffered and why he's campaigning for a change in the law. His father, David, and sister Katie both had very difficult cancers. Both died within 2 years of each other. He said that the fear they both suffered during that time, the fear of a painful death, it was so distressing for his family that clearly he's still in a great deal of pain about what happened. And he went through it twice, and he told this story to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was clearly very moved by this. But ultimately, he said, it is not a party political issue. He said, if somebody brings this to the Commons and there is a vote on it, then we will, as a government, enable legislation to happen, but we will not ever have a position on it. It is a matter of conscience. It's like abortion. We will never whip on this. We will never go into an election saying we will campaign on this issue. So what you're relying on is a backbencher being able to get that time in Parliament and being able to bring it to a stage where there is then a vote, and that's quite difficult.
They should find the time, because there is a clamour now in the country.
There is.
There is a report.
There needs to be a proper debate about it.
There's a report saying that that's published just today, saying that up to 80% of people are in favour of assisted dying. And you know, we always were told that people who are at the end of their lives and having palliative care were given the drugs so that they weren't in pain. It's now been reported that is not the case. They are in pain. They are distressed. So not only is it terrible for them, it's, as Sam says, it's terrible for their families to watch them in pain. We shouldn't be doing this to
what is it
humans.
Esther Ranson said very memorably in your paper, Sam? She said, 3 people in my life who are very close to me died very close to each other. My husband, my mother, and my dog. Only my dog
had the most
humane death.
Yes. And I think that is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
And we've had a great deal of support for the petition. More than 100,000 people have signed the petition calling for a change in the law, which means there will be a discussion in Parliament, but it does not mean there's a vote, and that's the careful distinction that it doesn't mean there will be action.
What would make the vote happen, Sam?
You have to basically have an MP bring it as a private member's bill, and then for that to progress to a stage where there is then a vote on it, which is quite difficult.
The government would have to create time for the debate, because you'd have to go through committee stages and all the rest of it. It's not just going to be a straightforward, this House supports it.
That would affect huge swathes of the population. And it's compassionate. My God, we're always talking about us being a caring, compassionate, civilised country. That's what this would be for them.
Yeah.
Would. Right, Sam and Carol, thank you very much for today. Still to come. Should you sit exams in person? Well, apparently not, according to students at Glasgow University, who say that it causes them anxiety.
Oh, God. Woke,
and
snowflakes.
Sadness. So presumably they want to do it down the line.
Groan and moan. Woke snowflakes.
Oh, dear. That and much more.
Well,
are you allowed to?
Well, we might be keeping you, actually.
Oh.
We'll wait.
Thanks, Bev. It's 11:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Couzens, should never have been a police officer, according to an inquiry, and chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored and missed. The 33-year-old was murdered on her way home in Clapham in South London by the serving police officer in March 2021. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Agiloni has warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. Miss Everard's family has welcomed the findings, saying she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car.
Even after Couzens' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
The latest migrant statistics show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. Government figures show small boat arrivals in 2023 have been down 36% since the year previously, and there were 5 times higher boat returns. However, the UK granted asylum to over 62,000 people in 2023, the highest level ever recorded. Hairy biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking duo partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at home with his family, including himself. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2662 and €1.1681. The price of gold is £1,603.82 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,640 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Right, up at 12 p.m. we've got Good Afternoon Britain with Emily and Tom. They are here with us in the studio. Morning, both. Do you have a good show lined up?
We do. Do you know, the big number, 62,336. Now, that's the number of asylum claims that we have accepted in just 1 year. 62,336. That is a record. The highest ever.
And how many have we sent back?
We're also, well, this is the question. The Home Office wants to get rid of this backlog. Seems perhaps at all costs. Have they been waving through some of these applications? That is the concern.
The backlog is down 20%. But the question is, what's the cost of getting that
and from what to what?
down?
It's still an enormous number,
It's
Tom,
still a
isn't
huge, it's a huge number.
It's
Absolutely
a huge
enormous
number.
And let's not forget that it wasn't so long ago that decisions were being made sort of within a week. Someone arrived, decision made, either accepted or go. So you don't have this problem of hotels, and the hotel bill has skyrocketed to £12 million a day now.
15, the Labour Party is saying.
£15 million a day, which we remember probably around last year we were discussing how £4 million a day was being spent on hotels and how
15 million.
No,
So that's
15 is
quadrupled. That's quadrupled.
Where is this money coming from?
You, me, everyone paying their taxes.
You're working hard, and that's where your money's going.
And the extraordinary thing is, if decisions were made swiftly and firmly, almost no money would need to be spent on hotels at all. Hotels are meant to be a temporary situation, but because people are waiting years to hear decisions and are appealing and appealing again, we saw in France just a couple of weeks ago how swift their new rules are with regard to this lack of appeals, quick deportation, and that's the end of the matter. In the UK, we just have this endless cycle of appeals.
I know.
And it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, and one think tank is saying that this quick decision-making
is going to come back to haunt the Home Office, and I think that's absolutely right.
Well, they don't have the wretched Human Rights Act, do they, in France?
Well, they've got the Human Rights Act is just interpreting European law and placing that into UK statute. So because they're EU members, they sort of do have that, but through the auspices of the EU.
Right.
But it's interesting. They have a very different level of appeals processes compared to us. So there are some differences. And, of course, there are some ways that France is more bound than the United Kingdom.
Of course, lots of people are going to want to seek refuge in this country. Of course they are.
But
62,000. Incredible.
Yeah, they want to go
year.
for a soft touch. That's what we
OK,
are.
great. Good show, guys. Thank you so
Look
much.
forward to
Emily and Tom will be back in about 20 minutes. For now, though, you are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. We have still got a lot more to come.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:40 with Britain's News when GB News' Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Shall we have a look at what people have been saying at home, shall we?
I hope they're cross about that play.
They are very cross about that play.
With its white gaze.
This is, just to be clear, if you're
No
just joining us,
white gaze.
Sam and Carol are still in the studio. They've come back in the studio with us, actually. And Sam was explaining earlier that this play is asking for just all-black audiences for 2 nights so that they can avoid the male gaze.
The white gaze.
Which Andrew said, do you mean homosexuals?
Yes, she said white gaze, and I said, do you mean homosexuals?
Sorry, the white
Do you know,
gaze.
Sam's mum and dad have already been on. They're killing themselves laughing at home. We should say hi to them.
But Michelle has said it is wrong and it shouldn't be allowed. If it was white people wanting an all-white night, there would be an uproar. David said, I'm a 57-year-old white guy. Would I be allowed in if I said I identify as a black bloke? Well, funny you should say that, because, Carol, you said the point about is it legal? And the wording in the statement says somebody who identifies as a black person.
They're taking advice.
That's right. And Christopher says the idea of a black-only theatre night, any other black events, is something common in the States. I suspect this will be a growing trend as we follow in the footsteps of our American cousins.
So what?
Yeah.
It's common States.
Yeah, a lot of you are just...
Gun crime is common States. Don't want it.
We don't want it here, do we?
But it's just disappointing because it's more division.
Yeah.
It's not like saying...
At the moment.
I don't feel like it's not fair, we should have white nights. I don't feel like that, but I do feel like, can we not stop looking for reasons to separate people? Bring them together.
Now, tell us about this. These.
Oh, we're sorry. In the same way, we've just got to move on. Sorry, Carol, to interrupt you. We've got to go to House of Commons, where James Cleverly, Home Secretary, is talking.
Many failings arising from the Sarah Everard case, and it was chaired by Lady Eilish Angiolini KC. Part 1 focuses on Wayne Couzens' career and previous behaviour. A report dealing with Part 1's findings has today been published. First and foremost, I would take this time to think about Sarah Everard's family and her loved ones at what must be an incredibly difficult time. And I pay tribute to them all for the immense dignity that they have shown in the face of such an unbearable loss in such terrible circumstances. Tragically, the report identifies that Couzens was completely unsuitable to serve as a police officer, and worse still, that there were multiple occasions where this could have been recognised. Lady Eilish found significant and repeated problems in recruitment and vetting throughout Couzens' career, including overlooking his chaotic financial situation. This meant that he was able to serve in a range of privileged roles, including as a firearms officer. It is appalling that reports of indecent exposure by Couzens were not taken sufficiently seriously by the police, and that officers were not adequately trained, equipped, or motivated to properly investigate those allegations. Had fuller inquiries been made in 2015 and 2020, Couzens could, perhaps probably would, have been removed from policing. Evidence of his preference for extreme and violent pornography and alleged sexual offending date back nearly 20 years prior to Sarah Everard's murder. And the inquiry found that Couzens was adept at hiding his grossly offensive behaviour from most of his colleagues, but that he shared his vile and misogynistic views on a WhatsApp group. The other members of that group are no longer serving officers after a range of disciplinary processes. The fact that many of his alleged victims felt unable to report their experience at the time speaks to an issue of confidence in policing among women. I wish to place on record my thanks to Lady Eilish and her team for this report. It is a deeply distressing but incredibly important piece of work, and they have approached it with thoroughness, professionalism and sensitivity, and we all owe thanks to the brave testimony of those who came forward and spoke to the inquiry. Everyone who Couzens hurt is in my thoughts today. The report makes 16 recommendations, and they include improving the police response to indecent exposure, reforming police recruitment and vetting practices, and addressing cultures within policing. The government will now, of course, carefully consider the report and respond formally in due course, and I can assure the House our response will be prompt. We are taking action to address public confidence in the police, and there has already been progress in a number of areas that have been highlighted by the inquiry. Anyone who is not fit to wear the uniform for whatever reason must be removed from policing, and every effort must be made to ensure that similar people never join. That is why we're providing funding to the National Police Chiefs Council to develop an automated system for flagging intelligence about officers in a much quicker time than is currently the case. We're changing the rules to make it easier for forces to remove those who cannot hold the minimum level of clearance. And police chiefs are getting back the responsibility for chairing misconduct hearings so that they can better uphold the standards in the forces that they lead. And there will be a presumption for dismissal for any officer found to have committed gross misconduct. And I can announce today that there will also be an automatic suspension of police officers charged with certain criminal offences.
So that was the Home Secretary, obviously responding to the Everard public inquiry. Sam, just briefly, the Labour Party frontbencher will respond to...
Yeah.
He can only mouth platitudes, really, from what he's heard about the report.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's it. It's important that it is discussed in the Commons.
Yeah, not many there, by the way.
There's not many there. It is a day when actually many MPs have gone back to the constituency by now, and obviously because this was a statement at the last minute. But actually, it is important that these things are all put on the record.
Yeah.
And I'm sure later down the line there will be attempts to force some kind of action.
Let's talk about these students, Carmelo. You and I didn't go to university.
No, we didn't. I got as cross about this as I did over this play in White's Bard. This is a group of Glasgow University students. They've been they're rebelling in mutiny over the fact they actually have to go into university and sit the exams in person, because for the last 2 years students have been allowed, because of COVID and all the rest of it, they've been allowed to do the exams online. Now, the university have said, because of concerns over cheating, and this makes total sense to me, because of concerns over cheating, because they can get their essays written by AI now. I mean, not that you will ever understand that or me how to do that. However, students do. They're going berserk. They're saying this is the thing that's causing them anxiety and sadness. I mean, so what? Actually, exams are supposed to stretch you. They're supposed to make you a little bit anxious.
I was stressed by my A-levels.
Me too. They're supposed to challenge you. And tough if you got one student, listen to this, one student whinging and moaning said, "I've never been tested on the ability to recall information." Well, it's time you were, love. It really is, because that's what an exam is all about.
It's amazing, really, isn't it, Sam? I mean, they've said that 2 months warning that they have to do these exams in person is not enough time, which basically tells me they were maybe preparing to chat GPT it in the privacy of their own living room. Now they're panicking.
Exactly. And I think, actually, what is the point of going to university? It is supposed to prepare you for your life, your future life.
Yes.
So if we've got students coming out of university, sadly, let's not forget, with at least £50,000 worth of debt, and then they can't even go into the workplace because they're stressed and anxious about having to actually write out by hand the answers to the exams.
Yeah.
We've got a real problem.
And they're even saying, like, they can still type the answer in a laptop. They just want them to all be sat in a room together so that
they can keep an eye on them.
So they're not cheating.
But,
so they're not cheating.
Isn't this generation the least resilient generation that you've ever come across? You know, there was a story in the papers the other day about a group of kids they had a trigger warning on because they were reading Dracula. I mean, seriously? They have trigger warnings on Shakespeare, on Chaucer.
They're getting one on Mary Poppins.
Oh, that was just beyond. And do you know why? Okay, so do you know why it got the warning on that? It was the British Board of Film Classics. They said that the word Hottentots was referred to twice. Now, do you know what a Hottentot is? Does anybody here know what a Hottentot is?
35 times.
I had to look it up.
Yeah.
Right?
To do with an African.
It's South African. It's a group called the Colin tribe, and Dutch settlers called them that because of they couldn't say the word Colin. Anyway, so a 5 or a 6-year-old who'd be watching Mary Poppins does not know what Hottentot means, and so does not attach any racist connotation to it. Yet you've got to have an adult with you now when you watch Mary Poppins.
Incredible.
The only way to solve that is to essentially put a trigger warning on everything that was produced before 2022. Because it's all offensive to somebody now, in modern sensibilities, sexist, racist, whatever you want to... You know, it's ridiculous to put trigger warnings on individual things. Nothing that was written 50 years ago would stand the test of modern...
But it's these woke students who've got no stamina, no backbone...
No resilience.
Who can't even sit an exam like everybody else did of our generation.
Well, there's
but I'm fascinated as to why this generation. We've had 13 years of a Conservative government. Why are they such absolute wimps?
Oh, well, I don't want to blame the parents, Bev, but...
No, I don't blame the parents. I blame the schools and the universities that drill into them that everything is a mental health issue. That if they get a bit anxious, that's a mental health issue. If they get stressed... No, it isn't. It's part of everyday life. And is it Frank Furedi, the sociologist?
Yes.
Yeah. He said the other day that we're medicalising kids now. There are tens of thousands of young people on drugs now because they're a bit anxious and a bit stressed.
Because they get stressed because their relationship breaks up. We
that's it!
Yeah, it's a stressful thing. It's a stressful thing.
I was arguing with someone yesterday who was saying you should have time off work if you have a relationship breakup. And I've never been at work in my 20s and 30s.
I know, that's true.
If that had been the case...
And you're always arguing with someone, Melissa.
Well, I'm always
And I don't know what we do about it. And you wonder, I mean, the point that Carol made then about the fact that these students are saying they've never had to retain and regurgitate information. But I genuinely think there is a conversation to be had about whether testing people, because they get all their information off Google, whether there is something outdated about our education system.
No. You should still exercise your brain. It's a muscle. You should still know how to use it. And even if you don't use it 100% of the time to research
Well, it's about memory, really, isn't it?
Yes.
And actually, kids don't remember anything now. They don't know their own phone number.
No.
They don't have to remember anything. So they would say, these students would say, but it's completely outdated to ask me to remember anything.
What were they doing in school? How did they pass their A-levels if they got to university? What, they retain no knowledge?
No, but this is COVID. But this is the COVID generation, because they won't have sat their GCSE. Well, they won't have sat their A-levels this lot. They might not have sat their GCSEs. I'm trying to think of the cohort. Depends what year they're in doing the life sciences at Glasgow. So this could be the first exam they've ever been asked to sit in person.
Incredible.
Well, let's get back to reality, shall we? Leave all that nonsense behind us. Right, we have to leave you behind us now as well. We're finished for today. That is it from Britain's Newsroom. Unusually, I will be back tomorrow morning at 9:30. He'll be having a lie-in somewhere. First, though, here are Tom and Emily. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. 62,336. That's the number of people we granted asylum to just last year alone. Some are saying quick decision-making could come back to haunt the Home Office.
And some are saying Emily Carver is very good at remembering long numbers. But he should never have been a police officer. That's the verdict of the report into the activity of Wayne Couzens surrounding the murder of Sarah Everard. We're asking, are the police fit for the job?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi, I'm Alex Burkill, here with your latest GB News weather forecast. It's going to be a wet day across much of the southeast. Elsewhere, plenty of showers and some strong winds because we have a relatively deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. But, like I said, lots of rain in the southeast because of a waving front that isn't going to go anywhere particularly fast, so some heavy, persistent rain for much of the day here. Elsewhere, something a little bit drier, but plenty of showers, particularly across much of Scotland. Some of these will be heavy, perhaps even thundery with some hail, and also wintry over the higher ground, and watch out for those strong winds too. It is going to be a chilly day for many, with temperatures near normal for the time of year, but in the southeast a little bit milder, highs of around 11 or 12 Celsius. In the southeast, that rain will gradually clear away towards the east as we go through the end of the day. Some clearer, drier weather for a time for many places, but still a scattering of showers across northern parts, and then later on as we go through the early hours of tomorrow morning, we're going to see some heavy rain and hail snow pushing into the southwest. Where we have clear skies, temperatures will take a bit of a drop, so some frost, some icy patches, also some fog and freezing fog to watch out first thing tomorrow morning. In the southwest and across parts of Wales, watch out for the heavy rain and hail snow could cause some travel disruption, some significant spray, and all that wet weather will spread to other parts of England and Wales as we go through the day, bringing some snow over higher ground. Best chance of staying dry and bright will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for many it is going to be another chilly day, temperatures lower than today in the southeast. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.